Praise the Lord. I am glad to be standing before you once again with the Word of God. I trust that God is keeping everyone safe in His mighty hands. For today's meditation, I'm going to continue in the book of Acts. As you all know, we are in the last few chapters, and we have coordinated such that we can wrap up the book in a few weeks. So I'm going to be in chapter 23 and 24 today. Acts chapter 23 and 24. So what is happening at this point in the book of Acts is that Paul has been captured by the Jews, a few Jews that were worked up with all the work he's been doing amongst the Gentiles and his preaching of the gospel. And so he was captured by the Jews, and they were creating such a commotion that he had to be actually saved by the Romans. So that was in chapter 22. The Roman soldiers saved him out of the hands of the Jews so they would not just kill him right there. And so in chapter 23, he is brought before the council of the chief priests and the elders of the Jews, and it's almost as if it is a scene similar to what Jesus went through when he was tried as well. So from chapter 23 through 26, what you see is Paul is going through a sort of a judgment or trials before different people, one after the other. First he's tried here before the Jewish council, and then he's tried later before three different Roman governors and kings before he appeals to Caesar himself, and then he's sent to Rome. And so you can see how Paul, so after going through the high descriptions of the missionary journey and all of those things that Paul went through, now there's a hyper focus on these last few chapters is just about Paul's trials. And it's very interesting how much details and descriptions are given about his travel, about his different speeches, and his trial before different people. And even as I was reading chapter 23 and 24, what struck me was how similar in many ways that he was going through similar things that Jesus went through, which was being tried before the council and then before Roman governors. So just like that, as chapter 23 begins, he is allowed to speak, and Paul, he starts to say something, and first thing he said was, I have lived in good conscience before God until this day. So this is Acts chapter 23, verse 1. So he's telling the council, I have lived in good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias, as soon as he heard this, he commanded the person standing next to Paul to strike him on the face, on his mouth actually. And this again, as I remind you, this is the same thing that happened to Jesus, right? So when Jesus said something, Caiaphas, the high priest at that time, commanded him to be struck in the face. And this Paul is now going through the same thing for the testimony of Jesus. This is no surprise, as Jesus promised us that we, as his servants, must go through similar things that he went. The servant is not above his master, right? So Paul is going through almost the same thing. But in this instance, though, Paul is given heavenly wisdom by God, and he realizes that there are Sadducees and Pharisees there, and he says something about the resurrection, and they started fighting amongst each other, and Paul is saved out of their hands. They were about to tear him in pieces, and then the Romans kind of pulled him out of there and helped him escape from that situation. So I'm just going to give a quick description of what happens in 23 and 24, and then I'll kind of go into the point of my message. So Paul is now saved out of the hands of the council. They were going to kill him right there. And then the Romans keep him safe under guard in a castle. And then meanwhile, there's about 40 Jews that took a vow, and they made a conspiracy among themselves that they will not eat or drink until they had killed Paul. So now this is happening in the background, and they made a plan that they were going to have the Romans bring Paul out under the pretension that he was going to ask him something and clarify something, and they were going to take him away and kill him. So they made this big conspiracy, and God saved Paul out of their hands. And Paul's sister heard this, and sister's son went and told the Roman chief captain of the Romans, and he, I believe his name is Claudius Lysias, and so he arranged for Paul under heavy Roman protection. I think he had like 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen, and in the middle of the night, under heavy guard, sent Paul away into another city called Caesarea so that he can be tried by Felix the governor. So what strikes me here is how incredibly God kept Paul safe in the middle of his imprisonment. So when we go through times that we feel like we are in some sort of prison or a situation where we have no way out of, no way to escape, and nobody seems to understand what we're going through, and it almost feels like you're just trapped in some sort of situation. And you might even be in that situation because you're obedient to God's will. And God has put you in a certain place to bear witness to His name and be a testimony to His name. But you feel as if you're in some sort of prison. And that was the situation Paul was in. But what strikes me is his prosperity amidst his imprisonment. Prosperity amidst his imprisonment. And now I'm not talking about prosperity like we always hear about, that he gained vast riches and he became wealthy. No, but he gained favor amongst his captors. The evil Roman soldiers had favor upon him because they realized that Paul was a Roman citizen. But it was all God's provision that God kept him safe. Even though these Jews took a vow, 40 people conspired in the background to kill him. But God saved him out of that situation. We have to understand, if we're in God's plan, if we're in the center of His will, obedient to His will, and we are where He placed us to be a testimony to those around us, to be a witness, to bring glory to His name, we don't have to worry about all the things that seem to go against our way. All the ways that we feel trapped, God is with you. God has seen ahead and prepared a few people that will have favor on you. And He will keep you safe in that situation. You can see that time and again, even though he's in bonds, he's captured, he's a prisoner, that he's having such favor amongst his captors. And it's just incredible. And you see that again throughout this. And as he's sent to Felix, even the amount of protection the Romans gave him, 270 people just to guard Paul. They didn't want anything to happen to him. When God does something, you understand and you realize how much He loves us, even though it feels like you might feel like He has abandoned us, right? There are times when we feel that He doesn't care about you. You feel trapped and you feel like everything you worked for you've lost. But here you see God has shown Paul that He sent 270 people and horses and all these things just to protect him. Prosperity amidst imprisonment. because God loved Paul so much. He sent him. And he sent him to Felix. And even before Felix, as I'm just explaining what's happening in chapter 24, and he goes before Felix, and all the Jews now descended upon Caesarea, and now Paul is standing trial before Felix. And again, here, they put in front of Felix a false witness, a Tertullus. His name was Tertullus. You can see that in chapter 24, verse 1. And he stood up before, so Ananias the high priest came here, and they put a lawyer or a orator before Felix. And his name was Tertullus. And he started giving this very eloquent speech, accusing Paul of all the ways he's brought harm upon the society. And he heard all these things, and the governor gave Paul a chance to speak, and Paul gave a speech defending his faith and told him that how anything he's done is only in obedience to God's call upon his life. And finally, Felix, this Roman governor, realized that there was something different about Paul. Again, favor amidst imprisonment. Prosperity amidst imprisonment. It doesn't mean that God gave him a way of escape out of that. He was still in prison or in chains, but God gave him favor amidst that situation. And Felix kept him in bonds, but brought his wife, and they wanted to hear him. And finally, towards the end of chapter 24, you see that when he heard God gave Paul a chance to minister even to these wicked Roman governor named Felix and his wife. And you can see in verse 25 of chapter 24, and as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled. Now this, if you read historical accounts of Felix, you'll know he's a very wicked and cruel man. He was merciless. But yet, when he hears the true gospel, and he hears of the judgment of God, he trembled. And he said, why don't you just go away and I'll hear you later. He couldn't stand before the power of the gospel that Paul had to preach. We have to understand that many times when we go through this experience of being under trial or imprisonment or a situation where we feel trapped, God might be using us to bring the power of His gospel to many that might not have had a chance to hear that ever. To help them hear of God's judgment. But as you're going through that, remember that God prospers you amidst your imprisonment. And that's the topic that came to my mind. Prosperity amongst imprisonment. And as I was reading this, I was remembering about the story of Jeremiah. So what happened if you read the book of Jeremiah about the second 2/3 of the book of Jeremiah, it's about one theme mainly. And the main theme is God is telling Israel through Jeremiah that you are going to be taken captive by this Babylonian king, and God calls this king Nebuchadnezzar my servant. And you can't even imagine why would God say Nebuchadnezzar is his servant? And he's saying, my servant is going to come and do my will and take you captive. And you will be captive and prisoners in Babylon for 70 years. And not a day earlier or not a day later. And Jeremiah said this prophecy many times again and again and again and again to the people of Israel and to the kings there, and they did not like what he had to say. And he was actually imprisoned, I think, about 3 times. One time he was put in a horrible pit and different places, and he was in prison. But God's message was, if you resist being captured by Babylon, if you resist your imprisonment, God will destroy you through famine and diseases and the sword. But if you go with your captor, if you go along with my plan of your imprisonment, you will prosper in your captivity. You'll build houses, you'll have peace, and you will marry and have children, and all these things. For 70 years, this is my plan for you. Prosperity amidst imprisonment. But the Jews did not wrap their heads around this plan. They did not want to obey God's plan for their life. In fact, they wanted to destroy Jeremiah because they brought them this bad message. Zedekiah the king could not stand him. He imprisoned him, and even though he knew he was right. And in fact, during this time, many false prophets stood up and said, "Oh, this is not true, what Jeremiah is saying. Yes, you might be captive, but God is going to save you in 2 years. You're going to come back, and everything will be fine." And God told Jeremiah to prophesy against those false prophets and said, "No, I didn't say 2 years, I said 70 years. Sometimes, we just take a second to talk about prophecy and being careful about sharing the burden of God. In fact, there is a chapter 23. If you read Jeremiah chapter 23, God is angry at these people who are saying, "You're saying you have the burden of God. I didn't give you this burden." What burden? "I'm going to forsake you for saying things I did not say." Let us be very careful when we speak in the name of God. When we say that God told me this, God told me to prophesy this or that, let us be certain that God put that word in our mouth. Sometimes we like to hear things that sound very good to our ears. We like to hear that God is going to, save us out of our suffering, and many times it is the case. But sometimes it did not come from God. And we have to be very careful what we say and what we allow to impact our lives. But here in this situation, God's plan was their captivity for 70 years. And God says that, "I did this because of your idol worship, and you went away from me. But I still love you, and I'm going to prosper you even during the 7 years of captivity. But you have to go through this plan that I have made for you. There is no way out of it." This is the same thing. I wanted to draw a parallel to what I said about Paul. That sometimes it feels like things are not going well in our lives. We feel like we try hard. We've done so many things again and again, and it fails miserably many times. But yet we hear the comforting words of God again and again. "Son or daughter, I am with you. My plan is being fulfilled in your life." God encourages and says, "Just a little bit more, and I will fulfill my plan in your life." Prosperity amidst imprisonment. Are we willing to be obedient when things are not going well? When things don't go as we expected and made all these calculations, we made all these plans, and it doesn't go like we wanted to. And we look at other people and say, "Wow, look at all these people. They're so successful. They seem to just do whatever they want and things go well." But yet we look at our own lives and say, "Wow, man, everything I'm trying is just failing. It's not working out." But God is saying, "I have not forsaken you. I have not abandoned you." In fact, God came to Paul after he was saved out of the council. In 23 verse 11, God came to him in the night and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome." God is encouraging you. As you go through impossible situations, and I ask the worship team to come forward, impossible situations where it seems like it's beyond your control, I ask you to turn to God and seek His counsel. God didn't tell him, as we said earlier, and I think I said it and Justin said it, that even though God gave Paul many chances to get out of this imprisonment and trial and just being crushed. Paul said, no, don't break my heart by asking me to change my course. I'm ready to die for the sake of the gospel. So God didn't say, I'm going to give you a way to escape, but He said, I'm going to take you, in fact, I'm going to have you do this all the way in Rome. You're going to have to endure many things for my name, but I am with you. And that's all we need. I am with you. I want to come back to Jeremiah, and then I'm going to conclude. In chapter 24 of Jeremiah, I'm not going to read it. God gives Jeremiah this vision of 2 baskets of figs. So one basket of fig was good figs, and it was wonderful to eat and tasty. But the second basket was so rancid and gotten so bad, it was just completely corrupted and could not be eaten. They were so bad. And God is telling Jeremiah, so the people who decided to obey me and go into captivity for 70 years and follow my plan for me to prosper them in captivity, they're the good figs. But the people who try to escape and just seek their own way and trying to find their own good life, and they wanted to leave and go to Egypt and go to all these places or stay back in Israel, when I told them you need to go to Babylon, they're the bad figs. They're so bad that I can't use them. I can't have any fruit out of them because they're gone bad and rancid. There's nothing that can be done. So the question is, are we the good fig or the bad fig? Are we willing to allow God to prosper us amidst imprisonment? Or are we wanting to seek our own way and try to escape out of the plan that He has for us? Sometimes captivity, sometimes trials, such great trials, sometimes we feel like we're going to break. But we know in those times, He encourages us to say, He is with us. He will never leave us or forsake us. May His name be glorified.